Make sure I'm in. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our special council meeting, July 11th, 2022. I'd like to call this meeting to order and ask Councilmember John Thorpe to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, sir. Jennifer, will you please call roll?
Councilmember Bogue.
Here.
Councilmember Duncan. Councilmember Thorpe.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Beaver.
Here.
Mayor Avila.
Here. Okay, Jennifer, right now, this is the time for public comment. It's time for public comment on any general item that's not on the agenda this evening. We have speaker slips at the entrance of the chambers. And for the public comment, we will allow 3 minutes. Jennifer, I have one public comment, and do we have any others? Okay, the speaker will be Tony Slake.
Good afternoon. Tony Slake, 33600 Calamasa Boulevard. As most of you know, in the past, there have been some real challenges with staffing and training the Mobile Home Rent Review Commission. For the most part, it's really a thankless job for those serving, and to be on the commission, you really need to have the heart of a servant, of a public servant, community servant. We need to give a sincere thank you to those folks and to you on the City Council for appointing such good people. Somehow this commission, our current commission, as new as they are, has come together like they've been working as a unit for years, a real think tank for the people. They took every issue seriously. They looked at every issue from just about every point of view. They looked at the pros and cons, who would benefit from changes, who might be slighted. They debated. No one took a stance without considering other thoughts and opinions. They were informed, and where they weren't, they asked questions to understand. They made intelligent, rational decisions and did an outstanding job with determinations that were good for the mobile home park residents as well as for the park owners. On all 15 items, they were solid and made an easy decision for the City Council to give their stamp of approval. And for that, I want to thank you for making this one of the most streamlined and successful reviews of the Yucaipa mobile home ordinance that we've ever had. And I believe everyone is grateful across the board, from park residents to park owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Slake. Jennifer, any more general comments?
No, sir.
Okay. Moving on to item number 1, annual adjustments.
Can I just take a quick minute to write these last minute? Easy. 12 to 13. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Council. And at this time, Amy and I will both be presenting the biennial review. There are 15 items before you today that the Commission has already heard and provided their recommendation. Their recommendations are included in the packet, along with all the stakeholder comments received, the letters that were received that the Commission reviewed, and the overall staff recommendation before you today. I'm assuming you're okay with us moving through each individual item, and then you would allow the public comment to come up on that particular item. You would have then your discussion and then take action. That's how we formulated it, but we just want to make sure that council's okay with that process.
I believe we're okay.
And then the public comment for each individual item, what will be the time limit so that those who are speaking can prepare themselves for each item?
Based on the number of comments I expect this evening, we're going to adjust the comment time to 2 minutes. Thank you for your patience with that, but otherwise we'd be here all night.
Well, in addition, you have a council meeting at 6.
And we have a council meeting at 6, so we kind
And
of
if I
have to
could
squeeze
just
in both.
graciously ask everybody in the audience to turn their silent on mute or their cell phones on mute, I think that would help out also. Okay, so the background, the ordinance requires that we review the ordinance and rules in odd number years. Since the completion of the 2020 biennial review, we did have one special rent adjustment come before the commission. It was Valley View Mobile Home Park. And what was ultimately granted to them was a base rent adjustment of $60.21. There was a Galand fee in addition, which is also on their rent statements for $15.66, and that drops off after 5 years. And the Galand, and Amy can speak more to it, but basically what it does is it covers the costs of the park owner's application and all their experts associated with presenting that item to the city for that special rent adjustment. The purpose of the annual adjustment, so this is item number 1 before you out of 15. This deals with the annual adjustment that the parks can apply for. It's a simple application process to the rent administrator's office. And what it is, it's what's been granted is 80% of the consumer price index with a 4% cap. The 4% cap came on as part of the 2017 biennial review. And as you can see in the highlighted section below, like it's starting in 2015 through 2022, you can see what the 80% of CPI was granted to the parks. That means then that base rent is adjusted by that factor of like 1.54 or 2.28, 2.60, and then the residents pay that becomes a new base rent for the next year. Obviously, we all know that inflation has hit us right now. 2022, you can see that CPI would have been 7.9%. However, with our ordinance, we have a cap of 4%. So the parks were granted a 4% rent adjustment. 80% would have been 6.32. In addition, as part of the 2017 staff report and included in your packet was an analysis conducted by Dr. Ken Barr, who's the city's expert whenever we have a special rent adjustment application before the commission and or council. And the question to him is, if the city would have allowed 100% CPI when these special rent adjustment applications come before us, what would be the difference of a rent adjustment? And when he did the analysis on the Yucaipa Village Mobile Home Park Fair return case, what it had ultimately equated to that it was a difference of $20.13 that it would have been reduced by that. So ultimately, they were granted $81.29. It would have meant instead of having their rent adjusted by $81.29, it would have been adjusted to $61.16. So it does show you the differences of 100% versus 80% of CPI overall. I think the ultimate goal of at least staff is to ensure the park is earning a fair return, but our goal ultimately is to eliminate as much as possible these special rent adjustments that come before the commission and or council. I can honestly say I've been through several since 2004, and it's very difficult on the residents living in the park. It's very difficult for the commission and ultimately council. And it's just an overall tough process because a small annual incremental adjustments on an annual basis is much different than a $60 to $80 adjustment that takes place after a 90-day notice once the ruling is made on that special rent adjustment.
Jennifer, can we go back to the slide there, just so I understand, and to the previous slide? The $81.29 is an actual charge?
Yes, it was determined for the Yucaipa Village case.
Okay, so the Yucaipa Village paid $81.29 based on the standards of today, 80% with a 4% cap.
What was determined in that case is that the base rent was increased to $81.29 on top. So if their rent was $300 at the time, the commission granted an $81.29 adjustment. So their rent went from $300 to $381.29.
And if we had the 100% CPI with a 4% cap,
No, this had no cap applied to it.
had no cap
would
applied,
have
but
just
it
been-
doesn't make a difference though in
It
this
would have
case.
just been the 100% CPI. That's what the analysis was based on.
And the actual cost would have been $61.16.
Yes, sir.
So they would have saved $20.13 per month.
Per space.
And that's an actual scenario.
Yes.
Okay, that's what I wanted to know. Thank you.
So what we did is we presented options to the commission, and some of these were brought up and proposed by stakeholders, which, as I said, they're listed on page 7 and 8 of your packet. Bait page is the number in the middle of the page. Option 1 is adjust 100% CPI and cap it by 4, 5, or 6%. Another option that was presented was 100% of the increase in CPI and eliminate the 4% cap. Option 3 was 80% of the increase in CPI with a 4% cap, and then also adding a minimum percent increase of 2%. So in that graph you saw back here that we had some years that were lower than 2%, but like in 2015, 16, and 17, even though 100% CPI would have been 1.58, what some park owners were trying to introduce is a minimum adjustment. So instead of 1.58, the adjustment would have been 2%. It's just an option that was presented by a stakeholder. Option 4 is to retain the existing language of the ordinance, and option 4 was the one supported by the commission. You can see it up here on the screen and in the staff report that the commission is recommending that the existing language be retained. Staff recommendation before you is that, because we feel it's a policy issue, that you review option 1 and 4 and provide direction. Option 5 doesn't exist really because no additional possibilities were introduced.
All righty, gentlemen, comments of staff? Thank you, Jennifer. Questions, comments?
Do you
All
want to
right.
take public comment at all right now?
Okay, we'll do that first, I guess. I'm sorry.
I can call them off if it makes it easier for you.
No, you're right. You need to remind me. Okay, for this annual adjustments, first out of the gate is Shirley Dalton.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members. I would like to say that I represent Yucaipa Mobile Home Residents Association. I'm the current chairman. And I would like to say that we concur with commission and staff's recommendation that we leave the rent adjustment as is, 80% with the 4% cap. Had it been 100% with no cap, the rent increase that I actually received on my home would have been double what I got. Had it gone the other way, if we had the 100% in, it would have doubled my rent increase this year. And as for a current return on investment for the park owners, if these restrictions are so onerous that they cannot make a good return on investment, I would really like some of them to tell me why they are so interested in buying new parks in this city when they know they have to deal with the rent control as it is now. So I would recommend that we leave the adjustment at 80% of CPI with the 4% cap. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Julie Pauley. Pauley, P-A-U-L-I-E. Again, I'd like to remind everybody, this is a two-minute restriction.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. Julie Polly with the WMA. I'll start off with some general and then address to the annual increase. Mobile home parks are market housing. They didn't receive any benefit from the city when they were developed to set aside spaces for low income. Park owners are not asking for you to get rid of the ordinance, rather to make some small incremental changes to make it more manageable. And we agree with Jennifer, your guiding principle should be how to reduce these hearings because they're miserable and heartbreaking for residents. They're very difficult for the businesses that are going through the application process, but your heart does go out for the residents that are having to be so worried about a $150 increase when they've bought into a rent-controlled property, expecting to have a small, reasonable, predictable increase. Small incremental changes to your ordinance today will make your hearings obsolete. They'll go away. And I think that I should repeat that because it's notable. If you make some changes to your ordinance today, you will not have any hearings. Park owners won't apply. So as for the annual increase, I think staff's report lays out good justification, what 100% of CPI would do. This year and likely next year and possibly the year after, facing record-breaking inflation rates. It's with a 4% cap, it's really more of a rent decrease for park owners because our purchasing power is decreased so significantly with this ordinance. So I fear that it's going to be the tipping point for a lot of hearings in the next few years. So I really hope that you will, in earnest, consider some changes this year. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Evans. Next up will be Mitch Emerson after Robert Evans.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council members. Robert Evans with Manufactured Housing Educational Trust, representing San Bernardino, Orange County, and Riverside mobile home park owners. I think I'm going to sort of reemphasize again some of what Julie mentioned. I mean, one thing that we all agree on, I mean, the residents, owners, city, to minimize the number of applications that are coming in for the rent increases. And they just tend to be a lot of work and a lot of pain. And then the numbers seem to be too big. And like staff pointed out, and your own study guy, Mr. Barr, pointed out that it would be much more reasonable and less applications being submitted if it was 100% CPI. That's basically what we're trying to avoid are those MNOIs submittals and then coming back and having them be, instead of, $20 rent increase, having to be $150 rent increase. That's not good. In essence, the mobile home parks are like a little city. I mean, we've got sewer, streets, everything, lighting, and it's like a little city. So can you imagine trying to run city of Yucaipa if you would just had an 80% over or 4% increase every year, 4%, and then like Julie pointed out, the CPI this year and probably the next two, it's gonna be high, and it's gonna keep making it so that there'll be more application submittals probably 3 years out that could overwhelm the committee and the city and frankly the residents. Those could be some big rent increases awarded, and we'd all like to avoid that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Emerson? Mitch. I'll do this from now on.
How you doing? My family's owned a mobile home park here in Yucaipa since, originally it was an almond orchard my parents first purchased in 1959. We developed the property ourselves as a family. We're not a big corporation. My dad was in the Seabees in World War II, so he was trained as a mason. He built the rec hall, he built the manager's quarters. I still got the original receipts for the first phase of the park, all the cement pads and the sidewalk that we were required to put in. And again, it's been a family-run business. But this ordinance, the way it is, we've actually filed 2 NOI adjustments over the years. The first one the city ignored their own expert, and that was back when they were in the trailers. They undercut us by $47 a month increase. We came back 7 years later and filed a second one. It was a 4-year process. Literally, it turns into a lawsuit. Jennifer and I are on a first-name basis because of that, and subsequent to that, we become friends. But here I am again. This cap this year, the cap's got to go. Because as your information will show you, for 30 years I've been doing this. Some years you're at 1% increase, some year you're under 2% a lot. And then the 1 year we finally, the CPI's high, we're gonna get a boost, a shot in the arm, the cap just wipes out half of it. And I've already consulted our attorney. For me, it's $16 on the table that just got wiped away. You know, and I'm one of the park owners. I put the money back in the park. I invite you guys to come to Valley Breeze and look. I've torn 3 old units out. Well, the third one's being torn out now. I've bought 3 units and put them in, you know, but my costs are up. I'm looking at repaving the streets. I mean, you guys know, you go fill up your fuel tanks. Everything's up. My vendors, you know, you pick the CPI adjustment to be a barometer of increases, and then we only get 4/5 of that every year. You know, what if and this is a rhetorical question, so I don't want the YMRA to get upset, but.
Mr. Emerson, your time is up. Finish your thought quickly.
What if I was to propose 120% of the CPI? You guys would say, that's not fair to the tenants. So how is 80% fair to the park owners?
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm sorry, what park do you represent, sir?
Valley Breeze.
I'm sorry?
Valley Breeze.
Valley Breeze, thank you.
Yes, sir. Thanks, Jennifer.
Okay, we have no more speakers on this item. Gentlemen?
Start?
Yes, if you want to start.
Okay. Well, first of all, I'm going to preempt what I'm going to say with something else. First of all, I've been on the council a number of years, and this has been a highly politicized, unfortunately, been a highly politicized process. It's very unfortunate, but it has been. And in all these years that I've been on the council, I have never, ever been approached and been told to get rid of the rent control ordinance. So whoever tells you that, that's just untrue. I don't know where that comes from, but no one has there's no any indication that we're gonna get rid of the rent control ordinance. But with that, I think there are things that we can do to minimize the headache that a lot of our seniors have with some of these increases. And one of them, I believe, is to eliminate the MNOI process, which is them coming back saying that our rents are too low, and then they're gonna go through this legal process. They go through this legal process, and then once the attorneys are all finished, you guys get billed for all the attorney cost. So I hate that. I'm no offense to our attorney right here, but I'm not a big fan of attorneys and their costs. So when I look at the ordinance, I do everything I can to try to minimize these increases. And I have talked to YMRA, and actually I've had a number of the YMRA members actually agree with me on this particular issue. I believe that this is the issue that if we went to 100%, it would help minimize those MNOI processes. This is not something, I've gone through this biennial review 5 times now, and I have never changed my position because for me, it's just plain math. The math shows that if you go to 100%, you're gonna have less likely have to go through the MNOI process, which then in turn, you will be paying for attorney fees. That's why I've always advocated for this. It's small increments. Now, I know a couple years ago, we moved the cap from 5 to 4. Now, back then, it really wasn't that big of a deal because I think the CPI was at less than 1%, but now CPI is at 10%. So there is a huge possibility that we go through these MNOI processes again. So personally, I think it would be wise and it would be advantageous for the residents to understand that, I know it's frustrating, but the 100% CPI and maybe move it back to the 5% cap that we had before. So that would be my position.
I don't think I could word it as well as he did, but I think looking at it, I would agree with option one. And probably about the 5% mark.
Justin?
I don't often disagree with my commissioners that are appointed to the various commissions within the city. I think they're well-versed in their areas of appointed expertise. Certainly, I know that the MRRC commission met for a long period of time to discuss this very matter. And I think it is telling that there was unanimous support for option 4. With that being said, Councilmember Bogue makes mathematical sense even for my brain. So I will also support option number 1, but I do see a point to, I think that you said 5% cap, is that what you had?
Well, just for the record, I also want to say that once perhaps we could revisit that, once the CPI or our inflation rate gets back to normal, because as of right now, where are we at, 10?
Yeah, 10.1.
Which is going to will trigger the MNOI process multiple times. And then we're not gonna just be paying for the CPI adjustments, we're gonna be paying for the attorney cost that goes along with that. So that's where, I know I feel like I sometimes come across as the bad guy with the YMRA, but in all honesty, I'm trying to do this to protect the residents from these major increases, so. But that's something I've been advocating for years, and I usually am on the losing end.
I'm just stuck on that first page. Dr. Barr's analysis shows that there is actually a savings if you go to 100% CPI of $20 a month. And everyone is going to have to take a bite down the road no matter what. It can be a big bite later on or a small bite as we move along, but it's going to be, it's going to go up. And how much can we, or how can the residents keep on taking these big hits? And I think it's a lot easier to take these smaller bites, these smaller hits as you go along rather than one big bite. And I agree, the winners of all of this are the lawyers. Everybody pays, and the lawyers are the ones who make all the money. I'm in favor of option number 1. I wanted to keep it at a 4% cap. That would be my suggestion. However, that's just my opinion.
Well, the only reason I picked 5 is because I know we changed it from 5 to 4 a few years ago. Do you know what year it was, Jennifer?
I'm sorry, I was talking. Can you repeat that?
We changed our cap rate from 5 to 4.
It was in 2000, it was the last biennial review in 2020.
That's when we changed it?
Yeah, you reduced it from 5 to 4.
Right. And it really didn't make much difference because our inflation rate was at 1%, so it really didn't make any difference. But now we're at 10.
You can see where it's been since 2015. And you are correct. At the time, it didn't seem maybe like a big deal because it wasn't even ever close to 4. It's just now 22 is the magical year.
Right. And that's what causes me to take the position I have. I feel that if we keep this going down this road, the rents are going to get so low, it's going to constantly trigger these MNOIs. Am I correct?
Yeah,
Ms. Grayson, you're looking at me.
It's on that slide, but I'd like to also say, say you do go down the 100% CPI with a 5% cap, with this year's current CPI of 7.9, it would be capped at 5, just so everyone understands what's being said right now. You want to explain that slide?
So my position was that we go back to where we were just a couple years ago.
For the cap.
On the cap.
On the cap. Does anyone have a preference, option number 1, option number 2 or 4, or 2 or 3?
I think we're I think we're all on number one. Now
Okay.
we're just talking about the percentage of 4, 5, or 6.
Somebody wants to make a motion?
I'll move that we adopt option 1, 100% increase CPI and a 5% cap.
All right, do I hear a second? At this time, no, sir, you cannot. Okay, it dies for a lack of a second. Do I have an alternate motion?
I'll move option number 1 with the 4% cap.
We have an motion for option number 1 with the 4% cap. Do I have a second?
I have
will-
a question.
You have a question?
Sorry.
Well, I'll go ahead and second it, and now
Okay.
if for further discussion before we vote.
So what would be the difference between that 4 and that 5%, that 1%? What's the takeaway from that?
In terms of dollars?
Yes.
I think it varies depending on what the CPI is.
And what park you're talking about, right?
Okay?
All right.
Let's try-
I have more questions, but this isn't the time for it,
Well,
so that's fine. We're good.
No,
I'm good.
this is
That's
the
fine.
time. Let's
That's
ask
fine.
those questions.
I don't know how to articulate it, so
Okay.
we'll just move forward.
We have a discussion at the, down there. Is it okay down there? We're fine? Okay, so the motion is 100% at 4% cap. We have first and second. If no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? It moves forward. Okay, item number 2, exempt long-term lease from AB 2782.
This one's mine. So for many years, the state has preempted a city's ability to apply rent control on spaces that are subject to long-term leases. A long-term lease is under that law was more than 12 months. And recently, and over the years, park residents have advocated for eliminating that so that even if there's a long-term lease, the space would still be subject to rent control. So in the 2020 legislature, the state did adopt AB 2782, which if you were on the council back about a year ago, you remember we brought this to you for a refinement of the ordinance. What AB 2782 does is to phase out that long-term lease exemption, and how that works depends on the expiration date of the long-term lease. The bill amended Civil Code Section 798.17 to basically prohibit new leases in any fashion being entered into between February 13, 2020 and December 13, 2020 that would exempt the space from rent control. So essentially, any space that either expires or if the park owner wants to extend it after February 13, 2020, they cannot exempt the space from rent control under this statute. In addition, the bill, and that was sort of a retroactive time period because the legislature was concerned that park owners would pressure residents to enter into long-term leases while the bill was pending in the legislature. The bill also made this exemption inapplicable for any lease entered into after January 1, 2021. The final thing that the bill does is it basically repeals 798.17 as of January 1, 2025. So a long-term lease that maybe extends until 2030, the lease will still remain in effect, but that rent control exemption will end as of January 1, 2025. Notwithstanding that statutory change, some of the park owners have asked the city to continue to recognize that exemption through creating a process that if a space is subject to some kind of long-term lease, that space will be exempt from the rent control ordinance for the duration of the lease. That issue went to the commission, and the commission's Yeah, it's up on the screen. The commission unanimously felt that the ordinance should basically track what state law says, and once state law says you no longer can have a long-term lease exemption, the same thing applies in the city. So they were not in favor of creating any kind of continued exemption.
Very good. Any questions of staff before we go to public comment? Hearing none. We have two speakers on this. Julie Polly is first.
Good afternoon. I think what I'm advocating for by suggesting the long-term lease exemptions should stay in place is to advocate the status quo currently, because we're in that phase out of the exemption. The law has like a schedule of when leases are signed, when they become exempt. So all leases will be exempt by 2025. And I really see this very similar to the discussion we had in this state a few years ago, or perhaps it was 2 years ago, about the Uber drivers and AB5. Why does the city need to get in between two parties that agree on the terms of a contract? Why do you insert yourself in that and say that you know better? So I would argue that continuing the lease exemption limits your liability because there's fewer space on rent control. It's a peacemaker. The long-term leases are peaceful. The parties agree on the terms of the rent, and usually the purchaser of the home or the resident makes a determination if they want to enter into that lease. So I think it should continue as is, and I think the city of Yucaipa has the ability to say what your ordinance applies to and which spaces your ordinance applies to and which are exempt. And so I'm just advocating for the status quo. Thank you.
Thank you. Robert Evans?
So thank you. So pretty much I'm asking the same thing Julie just said. So, these are long-term leases that went into effect that both parties agreed on so they could outline. And I always think of a long-term lease as basically rent control. I mean, it's outlining what your rent's going to be over a long period of time, and it's defined with a range of X and Y, CPI, or whatever it may be, however it's defined. But you could see what your rent's going to be. It's nailed down. The law, 2782, they're going to make the long-term leases exempt in 2025 anyway. So let's let the law do what it was intended to do. It had a time frame laid out. Currently, the residents on long-term leases, the park doesn't have to pay for their pay the city the space fee for administration because those spaces aren't on rent control. So those residents are that's one of the savings they're getting, is not having to pay that space rent, the admin fee. So we're asking that it stay status quo, remain the same, and 2782 will go into take effect January 1, 2025 on these long-term leases anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other speakers on this subject, so go ahead, gentlemen. Any discussion? Any motions?
I say we just keep it the way it is.
Is that your official motion?
That's my official motion.
I'll second his official
Simple.
motion.
Okay, staff does not recommend any changes to the ordinance relating to the spaces subject to long-term leases. That's your motion, no changes. All right, we have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. All right, very good. Coming on to item number 3, rent adjustments upon vacancy, in-place transfers.
This one's mine also. Now we're going to have a discussion about how the ordinance treats vacancies. And a vacancy under the ordinance can mean a space that is completely empty, there's no space on it, or it can mean a mobile home that stays on the space and somebody different moves in, or a mobile home is taken out and a new one is put on the space, but it's the same occupants. So the first issue is the treatment of what we call in-place transfers. An in-place transfer is defined under the ordinance as a vacancy that results from the sale, transfer, or other conveyance of a mobile home. Again, like I own the home, I take my home off, I put in a new home. I'm still living there, but my home is different. That's one kind of in-place transfer. I pass away, my heirs inherit the home, they move in. That's another kind of in-place transfer. And then we also have what we refer to as involuntary transfers, such as somebody gets evicted or a creditor forecloses. That's a third kind of involuntary transfer. Currently, the ordinance does not allow any kind of rent increase in any of those situations. Now, I just wanted to quickly go over the other kinds of vacancies under the ordinance, which is on the slide up there. And Jennifer's going to actually talk about some of the other kinds of vacancies. But again, these 7 categories were put into the ordinance back in 2020. Before that, we had vacancies defined, but it wasn't quite as refined as this, and we found that we needed to do some work to clarify some of the issues. So we call category number 1 is where the space is empty because the resident voluntarily left the park, took the home with him or her. The second one is the space is empty because the mobile home was destroyed. It could have been by fire, earthquake, whatever. The third category is where a mobile home is abandoned and the resident leaves. Park owner gains title and then sells that home to someone new. Or rents it, yes. And just a refinement is that situation does not apply where the home is abandoned because of an eviction. And there are some policy reasons why the ordinance makes that distinction. The fourth category is the in-place transfer that I described. The fifth category is where the occupancy of the mobile home changes, such as based on inheritance or anything like that. The sixth one is I sell my home to someone, they take it, and I put a brand new home in. That's another kind of vacancy. And then the final one is a change in occupancy or ownership of the home, which is a result of an eviction or other involuntary termination of tenancy. So the categories where no increase is allowed are the in-place transfer, as I've described it, a change in occupancy of the home on the same space, a replacement of the mobile home on the same space, or a change in occupancy of that home which results from an eviction or involuntary termination of tenancy. The ordinance does allow a limited type of increase in the 3 situations that are listed on the slide. One, and those were put in 2020. If the current resident moves out, takes the home with them, and a new resident moves in, when that new resident moves in, they are allowed a small increase. If the mobile home is destroyed by fire and that tenant leaves, doesn't come back with a new home, and then a new tenant comes in after that with their home, a small increase is allowed. And finally, when the home is abandoned and the park owner gains title, the same type of increase is allowed. And in that situation, when the new resident comes in, the park owner is allowed to increase the last rent in effect prior to the vacancy, meaning what the old tenant paid, based on either the combined average of the rent-controlled spaces in the park plus 10% or $35. And that was whichever is less. And that was a formula that the council back in 2020 decided was appropriate. So for in-place transfers, some of the park owners have proposed that they would like to be able to raise the rent to market rent when there is an in-place transfer. If I own my home, I sell it to Jennifer, same home, looks the same, et cetera. The only difference is the occupant. They want to be able to raise the rent for Jennifer to market rent. A variation of that is the second option, which would be put some kind of parameter, some cap or limit on how much the rent could go to, or some method for determining what market rent is. Because in the first category, there's really no definition of what is market rent. It would essentially be whatever the park owner can get for that home. I'm sorry, whatever the park owner can get a new tenant to agree to pay, that's what they would pay as their rent. The third option is to leave the ordinance as is, as to in-place transfers, and that's the option that the commission unanimously felt we should leave the ordinance as is and not allow for any type of increase for an in-place transfer. And I can answer any questions.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Hearing none, we'll go ahead and ask again, Julie Polly to come up. Maybe you can sit closer. So we don't have to take that big, long walk.
If there's any aspect to your ordinance that drives litigation in hearings, it's this part of the policy. And all we're asking for is something similar to what the city of Yucaipa lives with Prop 13. A prospective resident that's going to buy a mobile home, they make a purchasing decision with their eyes wide open. This isn't imposed upon them. Just like a homeowner, when they go to buy a home, the property taxes are disclosed, and the HOA fees and all the other fees that you're expected to pay as a traditional homeowner are disclosed at the sale. So this is no different. Most ordinances in California, can you go back to the options of the three options? Most of the ordinances in California are option 1 or option 2. Yucaipa falls in option 3, which is no increase, and those cities are the ones with hearings. And if you made an adjustment to allow a park owner to make a little bit of an increase on turnover, harming nobody, that you would, Mark Alpert and the mobile home park attorneys wouldn't come to the city of Yucaipa anymore. We'd be fine. We'd never have to put an application for it through a hearing. It's demonized a lot, unfoundedly. If you look at the data in Yucaipa, mobile homes with higher rents sell for a higher price. So that's the resale data in Yucaipa. So this, having some sort of incremental increase on in-place transfers is really key to getting out of the hearing business here. So hopefully you'll consider something like that. Thank you. Oh, and items 4, 5, and 6, I agree, and we agree with staff. So I'll just say that now so I don't have to make the trip down. Thanks.
All right, thank you. Mr. Evans?
All right, little repetitive, won't say as much, but vacancy decontrol does not affect the rents of existing residents. They keep the same rent level, no increases. Dr. Barr, also in the 2017 biennial review, he also noted that a way to keep down the MNOI applications would be some form of vacancy decontrol could reduce fair return applications and rent adjustments. So that could also help with the applications. And then just wanted to share with you that statewide rent control bill, AB 1482, that passed and does not impact mobile home parks, but in that bill, they included vacancy decontrol as part of the bill. So, I mean, and that's a statewide rent control bill. Think that is it. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right, that's it for public comments, gentlemen. We have any questions, discussion, or is there a motion?
I'll motion in line with city staff and MRRC option number 3.
You have a motion to approve option number 3. Do I hear a second? Sounds like it dies for lack of a second. Is an alternate motion? Do you have any questions?
I think my concern more is a general discussion. We do see the inflation, I just going back to item 1, we do see the inflation rates going up substantially, and I am concerned of the MNOI process. It's coming down. There's going to be lots of increases. At some point, park owners are going to be looking for ways to make up for lost rent. That's just what they do. They're in it for the business. So I'm thinking of different ways that you could offset those costs without affecting the residents that are in the parks today. I don't want to, I'm trying to minimize the impact on what happens to you in the park. And I don't know, I'm not sure why vacancy decontrol and allowing them to increase rents on a new occupant, how that affects the current occupant. And perhaps Jennifer or Amy, you could respond to this.
In the past, the concern with this item is it's an existing tenant selling their asset. And the concern raised for several years by YMRA is that you're taking away that opportunity of that resident's investment. Now, 4, 5, and 6 that are coming before you, agenda, the next 3 items are dealing with the resident in current living there now, they choose to abandon, they leave voluntarily, and or fire and flood destroyed. We are proposing something that allows an adjustment to help the park owner get an increase on their base rents. This one, where the staff's recommendation along with the commission is that this is dealing with people who are residents that have lived there and are staying there or selling their asset. And so our recommendation has been to retain all existing language. I don't know if you have anything else to add on that.
Are you saying that it devalues the property by taking it out of and kicking the rent up? Because they know that it's now going to go into a higher rent, which would devalue the coach? Is that what the issue is?
The argument that has been presented by YMRA is that if the park owner can raise the rent to whatever they want, as an example, on a sale of an existing home that stays in the park, the selling tenant gets less for their home. And so their asset, as Jennifer said, loses value.
So it devalues the coach.
Yes, or if that resident gets rid of their home and brings in a new one, they've spent the money on the new home and now they have to pay higher rent, if that was one of the options you considered. But yeah, they focus on the idea that the value of their asset will be reduced.
Okay. Do you want to remake your motion? I just wanted to hear more. Like I said, I'm more concerned about the trend that we're heading down with inflation rates where they're at. And there's going to have to be some give somewhere because we are going to see the MNOI process and the gallon effect, is it called the gallon effect? That's going to be extremely detrimental to the residents. So.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but I think there is something to be said about if I'm trying to market the sale of my coach with this looming unknown of how much it's going to be after or potential for it to raise after the sale, it's concerning. There are ways to make money in this. I don't think this is it. This is not the same as the sale of a property and property tax. Otherwise, it wouldn't be coming before us. This is mobile home rent. I don't support the argument that this is no different than a sale of a house and real estate going through escrow and the reassessment of taxes. It's not the same. If it was the same, somebody would be buying a house. There's a reason they're buying a mobile home because it's affordable.
Is that your new motion of item 3?
I motion, as previously motioned, support the commissioners and the city staff for option number 3.
I'll second.
All right, we have a first and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Item passes. Moving on to item number 5. Rent adjustment upon vacancy, adjustments on spaces that have been vacant because they have been empty for an extended period of time.
Okay, actually, we're on item number 4.
I'm sorry?
But that's okay. They're kind of all, as I said, on the next 3 items, 4, 5, and 6, I'll address rent adjustments upon vacancy that we talked about. Abandonment, destruction, or voluntary termination. These people are leaving the park, they're not coming back. Only a new tenant to the park or a new tenant to the city of Yucaipa are coming in. And when this was changed, we did it in 2020, and the whole idea is, why should someone moving into our community or moving into the park community benefit or get the benefit of the people that have been living there and existing there? And this was our initial approach. We kind of worked on it with Tony Schlick and YMRA and some of the park representatives, and we're trying to figure out, yeah, we all agree that people from out of town shouldn't benefit or get the same initial start as people that have existed in the park. And what we came up with at the end of the day through the commission and the council process is, based on these specific conditions, that the rent, when someone new comes in, the city would we would determine that it would be based on the average of the rent control spaces plus 10% or $35, whichever is less. And we thought, well, yeah, that should be work out in the worst case scenario, or, it'd be $35 or less. However, and we haven't had many applications. Actually, the first one came in this year that had us look at the rent. And what we're finding out is new residents would still be paying a lot less due to that cap. And the staff report includes an example of playing out an actual park in Yucaipa based on the 2022 annual registration, based on the formula in play right now with the current ordinance and rules. The resident would be they'd come in and their new base rent would be $363.50. The problem is this new potential resident would be charged a base rent which is lower than the 63 other rent-controlled spaces in that park. I do not believe that was staff's intent. Actually, I know it wasn't the intent of staff, and I don't think it was the commission or council's intent either. So what we presented the 2 options to the commission, which is either option 1 is to eliminate the cap, and what we're recommending is that the new rent would be based on the average of the rent-controlled spaces. The commission concurred, and the recommendation before you right now is that you approve option 1, which is amending the ordinance and the rules to eliminate the cap, and the new base rents would be based on the average of the rent-controlled spaces in the park. That's all I have at this time.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? Hearing none, Ms. Pauley, just officially, you have no, okay. Mr. Evans, did you want to say something? Okay, thank you. We do have one speaker, Mr. Emerson. He left. Okay, so we have no other speakers on this item. All right, gentlemen, questions, discussion, or motions?
I'll move option number 1.
Second.
We have first and a second to use or to approve option number 1. Do I need to read that, or we're good? All right. If no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? It carries. So that was 4. Now we get to move to number 5.
Thank you. That's me again. And actually, I'm kind of sad Mitch left because this was his item. This issue is based on that spaces have been vacant in the park. It means it's a vacant pad, and they've been vacant for an extended period of time. And he actually came to the city because he was interested in having a new tenant move their coach into the park, and we were trying to figure out what that base rent was. And what we found out in the process, because typically we don't have a lot of parks with vacant spaces for extended periods of time, and we're talking beyond 5 years. And as Mitch stated when he came in here, is Mitch and his family and his mom and dad, and now he lives in the park. And so he's very picky in who moves into his little community, because we all know a good neighbor is great, but a bad neighbor is awful. And so he has been very selective. And that's one of the reasons why for years he's had some vacant spaces. But the one thing we did notice is, as Mitch stated, is he's gone through a couple special rent adjustment applications. And when this new tenant was looking at moving into the park this year, how our formula works in what the current ordinance is, it doesn't capture that special rent adjustment. So what we're proposing before you, and here's an example that's in the staff report about how they would be paying, the new person coming in would be paying a lot less than the people who've lived in the park for several years and who had to go through the rent adjustment, special rent adjustment. The options before you is that you amend the ordinance and rules to allow this new space to come in, that it would be based on combined average rent controlled spaces plus 10%. And that's, the commission is supporting that recommendation also.
And that's your presentation?
Yes.
Thank you. Any questions of staff? We have no speakers. Ms. Polly, you're waiving your speak? Okay. Since there are no other speakers, gentlemen, any questions, comments, or motions?
I'll move item option number 1.
Motion to approve option number 1.
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Moving on to item number 6, rent adjustment upon vacancy.
Thank you. This is me again. This deals with the same kind of issue with regarding the vacancies, and currently the ordinance does not address rent adjustments when a park-owned mobile home is sold to a new resident that has never lived in the park. We're just recommending that the ordinance be amended to provide that if a park owner sells a park-owned mobile home to a new resident, the base rent should be the combined average of the rent-controlled spaces plus 10%. The commission has supported this option, and the recommendation before you this evening is to approve option 1.
All right, any questions of staff? Okay, we have one speaker, Ms. Polly, you waive your right for this one, and Mr. Emerson is not with us, so we have no speakers on this item. Gentlemen, questions, comments, motions?
I'll move approval option number 1.
I'll second.
We have a first and second to approve staff recommendations and MRRC recommendation. If no further comment, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to item number 7.
This one is, excuse me, is mine. Those of you who have been on the council know, and I'm sure the new members are also familiar with, we have a separate process for capital improvement rent adjustments. Those provisions have been refined over the years. Originally, they were included in the M&OI rent adjustment, but eventually, I forget what year, 2016? Or maybe earlier, they were pulled out of the M&OI rent adjustment, and we created this separate process. The capital improvement rent adjustment does not become part of the base rent. Once the park owner collects what is in effect the cost of that capital improvement plus interest, then that amount of money drops off the rent. And so it gives the park owner the money back that they spent, but it doesn't make the residents pay that cost forever. 2011 is when we did that. We also added an emergency capital improvement process to deal with situations where the whole petition resident vote situation could not be met because, for example, there's an earthquake and the water system is destroyed and the park owner needs to act immediately to restore water. So we wanted to come up with a way that we could give them an expedited way to do the work, but then they would still have to come in and get that amount approved before they could pass it on to the residents as a rent increase. Notwithstanding those changes, some of the park owners have asked to basically get rid of the whole approval process and just allow them to essentially pass through capital improvements as a way of giving them the ability to carry them out. Staff did not support that because that was deemed to be inconsistent with the prior policy decisions to allow residents to have an opportunity to review what is proposed and have input, because they're the ones that are going to have to pay for it. And hopefully it would eliminate arguments over whether something is really necessary. So the commission agreed with staff and recommends that you not make any changes. And that's the report on that item.
All right, thank you. Are there any comments or questions of staff? If not, we do have two speakers. Ms. Polly is the first one.
A couple of years ago, it became really an issue of blight in our properties. And so we went through this whole process on crafting a closure ordinance. And I think at that time, we all kind of came to terms soberly that there are issues in our properties from anecdotally, and we would love to address them, but the residents will never vote on a capital improvement. They just don't. And that's not unique to Yucaipa. They just don't want to pay for it. In a rent-controlled scheme, it's totally appropriate to have pass-throughs and have a pass-through process. So I think we would love to improve our properties, but we can't do it with the rent increases that we get. And having a process that was somewhat automated, I think you would see some really nice improvements in the properties. So I would hope that you would take a second look at this. Thanks.
Thank you. Mr. Evans, you're not marked down, but did you want to speak on this issue? You're more than welcome to. Okay, thank you. Let's see, Suzanne Taylor.
Good afternoon. I'm Suzanne Taylor. I'm the Executive Director of Augusta Communities. We own Valley View. Recently, 2 years ago, seems like yesterday, we went through the rent increase process that you talked about earlier, the MNOI. I'm talking on this issue. It's really important to us as a nonprofit. I think, as having been involved in redevelopment and housing for many, many years, I think encouraging park owners to invest in the health and safety of their community is extremely important. You can remember back when they had redevelopment agency and they did all kinds of things to eliminate blight. And one of the things that is constantly in the forefront is properties that aren't maintained. So the better the properties maintained, the better for the community, the residents, and the city of Yucaipa at whole. Current capital improvements in the ordinance must be completed before a park owner can ask for a rent increase related to funding the project, as Jennifer described. This is a gamble for park owners and especially for nonprofits. We don't have a pot of money set aside to prepay for an improvement, which means that we have to get a loan. No one's going to loan us money to do that improvement unless we have a revenue stream. Now, the residents can decide if they want an improvement that is not related to public safety. If they want to paint the clubhouse, that kind of thing, well, that's not really a capital improvement, but something that is not a public safety issue, I think the process is fine the way it is. But in something that's a public safety issue, I think the park owner has the ultimate responsibility for reducing risk in that park related to that improvement. And also the city, just by the nature of government, should be impressed with how a park is managed in terms of public improvements. So I ask you to put in place a process to for the city to say, yes, this is a public safety need, and we deem this to be a public safety project, and therefore, if you move forward, it would be eligible for reimbursement. That would take the gamble and the risk away of investing in that park. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, can I clarify
Yes,
something?
yes, please do.
Under the current process, in a non-emergency situation, if an improvement is claimed to be health and safety, the park owner still has to go through the resident meeting process, but even if they don't get the consent, if it is a health and safety improvement, then the city will authorize it. The consent issue becomes more critical when it's something that the residents might say, yes, this would be nice to have, but we can't afford it, so we don't want you to do it. And that's the difference. I just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, thank you, thank you. All righty, no more comments on this, gentlemen? There's any questions, comments?
I have a couple thoughts. I don't know if it's a question, but I don't know how we would go about doing it, but if there's a way to, like Amy was just saying, dealing with health and safety issues, if it's a lighting issue or a legend for the park so people know where they're going, some of those issues probably need to be addressed, having patrolled trailer parks before. Some of them look like they're neglected and need a little bit of help. But I don't know how you go about doing that without surprising your residents. I think there needs to be some sort of process or something developed that would allow them to make some improvements.
So if I'm reading this correctly, our current, I'm just going to highlight this real quick. If no resident election is held or the park owner does not obtain at least 51% consent, the park owner demonstrates that the capital improvement is necessary for the health and safety of the park, its residents, or its neighbors. In order to obtain approval for a capital improvement rent adjustment, the park owner must obtain application from rent administrator. I'm not sure if I need to explain this to the park owners, but maybe get good at articulating health and safety, okay, and really polish up on the broken window theory. What happens in your park, if it looks run down and neglected, it is a health and safety issue. If you're not articulating it as such, then get better at that. The bottom line is, I think as you start coming forward with capital improvement, at least from my position, and you're absolutely right, lighting is a safety need, right? And these are things that are important, but anybody who studies criminal justice will learn the broken window theory, and this, I would argue, it applies. Certainly something that should be coming before the rent administrator as an application.
Yeah, you are absolutely correct. We had a park, and I won't say the name, came in, they wanted to kind of redo the entrance frontage of their park. Residents in the park voted it down. They brought it to me, the rent administrator, and that's clearly not a health and safety item. We've had another one to where they needed to improve the streets in the park because they were starting to give way. The residents voted it down. It came to the city rent administrator, and because we require mandatory trash service, those trucks are heavy, and then if there's a fire, the fire trucks are heavy. That was considered a health and safety. And I do, as staff, I vet with the attorney. Some of them are pretty much black and white, but some, if there's a question, we do review it. But that way we ensure that it is a qualified health and safety, and these improvements aren't just being done without a review of somebody.
But what I wanted to, and thank you, I think you made my point, but it also, as specifically mentions here, and its neighbors. So it doesn't have to necessarily just affect the park. If it's something that is affecting a neighboring property, neighboring business, this is now becoming a community issue that needs to be addressed from within the park. Shouldn't be a burden of the city to address something that is becoming dilapidated from a park perspective. Am I accurate in that assessment?
A good example of that would be, not in this city, I had a situation I was advising on where there was a sewage spill from one park that went onto public streets, or you could, a situation where that went onto neighboring property. As if it's a utility that is not regulated by the PUC, it is something that the city can approve a capital improvement rent adjustment on. And in that situation, that would be health and safety. Lighting, you mentioned, is problematic because that is regulated by the PUC, and the PUC rates, the PUC approved rates are supposed to cover the costs of that. So under that analysis, they can't come to the city for an increase, nor can they separately assess an increase because it's preempted by the Public Utilities Commission. Same thing with gas. If there were a gas leak, they would have to go make an argument to the PUC that the gas rates are too low. But those are kind of special situations. But the idea was come up with a process that will enable the parks to come in when it is a health and safety issue, so that even if they can't get consent, you've at least told the residents, this is what we're gonna do. City rent administrator looks at it and says, yes, it is health and safety. Same thing with that emergency situation where there's a sudden damage or destruction and it clearly is health and safety. That's where those ideas came from.
And with the emergency capital improvement item, say, a fire ripped through the park, like what happened in Calamasa, or a water main break in the middle of the night, the ordinance has a provision in it to where they don't have to meet with the residents. They're allowed to address that issue right then and there, and then we have a process of how quick it has to be dealt with, and then there's steps in place in the ordinance and rules now to address an emergency capital improvement.
And I certainly don't mean to be argumentative, I just want to clarify so I can wrap my head around it. A few months ago, the city council approved, on one of the basis of public safety, investing in our public lighting because it was deemed to provide more light, reduce crime, overall safety. So I want to make sure I'm clarifying that although lighting, I think you said was a sticky one, we voted, I think almost unanimously, that it was a safety matter that we needed to improve and upgrade our lighting to provide a more safe environment. So I just want to make sure that what I'm trying to say is there are situations that I think that can be articulated by park owners as to why it's a safety matter that may not be apparent on face value, but can be articulated as such to our rent administrator in a way that would make sense, and why it may be a creative thinking safety matter. I'm a public safety expert. I'm telling you right now, there's all kinds of guises that don't look to be public safety on surface, but when we get right down to it, law enforcement, first responders, city staff are gonna have a hard time accessing properties if there's not safety protocols in place, even if it doesn't appear so. I see what you're saying with the fascia improvement or landscaping in the front. I understand that. But I wanted to make sure that hopefully my point was taken, that there are avenues to address capital improvements as it relates to health and safety, even if they don't appear health and safety on the surface.
All right, any more questions, comments? So do we have a motion?
No. I don't think we've had a motion, have we?
That was just a comment.
No.
It opened up a can of worms.
I think you asked for a motion.
I asked for a motion. I'm sorry, I wasn't clear on that.
Can I add something really quick to this? Can I add just really quick? Maybe we can incorporate it into the motion. A number of years ago, we did go on a tour. We rented a bus, and all the city staff, not all the city staff, but a number of the directors, I believe all the city council members, we went and drove around to a majority, or at least, I don't know, half of the parks. I don't know how many parks. We went through, and I have to tell you, there are some, as Councilmember Thorpe said, there are some really dilapidated parks out there, really bad, until you actually drive through them and see them. In fact, I brought it up at a council meeting with one of the park owners. He was here, and he was highly offended that I even said that his park needed to be cleaned up. And I see a lot of smiles out here, but you guys might remember that one. But by me bringing that up, he actually did clean up the park. So perhaps one way that we can address this is maybe we ought to do another tour and go through, and we can look at some of these parks. Let's go through and look and see what we can do to help these out, because some of these parks are horrible, and something needs to be done. So
Yeah, I
maybe
think-
within that motion, we make no changes or whatever this is, and then go on one of those tours again.
That would be my motion. No changes as per staff recommendation.
Okay, and then I think we don't need a motion to set up a tour. I think that's something that we can maybe offhandedly request. Yeah, the tour was those 7 worst parks, if I remember correctly.
It was an eye-opener, that's
It
one
was
thing for
very
sure.
much an eye-opener.
I would like to add too is our code enforcement division, they do, pursuant to state law, they do their review and I forgot the name of it. They do a pretty detailed review of the parks, and they start identifying items that are in a code enforcement component to where they kind of get on the park owner to do some of the cleanups to ensure that they're in compliance with the mobile home residency law in Title 25. I think that it's beneficial. Council made that decision a long time ago to take that control in-house versus giving it back to the state after the county gave it up. And so I think that the city code enforcement officers have maintained current inspection on some of these parks, but we still do have a lot that are run down for sure.
Yeah, so the motion was to approve staff recommendation to make no changes to the ordinance or rules relating to capital improvements rent adjustments. Is that correct? Correct. All right,
I'll
did I get a
second.
second? We have a first and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposition, subject or the matter moves forward. It's approved. Number 8, annual registration form requirements.
So this item is mine. As you probably recall, the city requires that every regulated park has to register each year, and the registration requirements include the park owner providing information on the status of the different spaces, whether they're subject to a long-term lease, whether they're a month-to-month space, if they're park-owned and rented out, et cetera. We had a situation in the past year during this year's annual registration process. One of the park owners who actually had provided all information on all the types of spaces in their park in prior years, this year said they didn't think the city had the right to ask for information on the leased spaces and refused to provide it. We feel the ordinance and the administrative rules are pretty clear that they have to provide that information, but rather than argue about it, we just are recommending that we, I guess, tweak the language of the ordinance and the rules a little bit to make crystal clear that whether or not your space is subject to rent control because for a certain period of time it's exempt from the ordinance, you still have to provide the information on what that space is, what the rent is, when a lease, as an example, when that lease expires. And given the changes to Civil Code 798.17 that were effectuated by AB 2782, that makes it much more critical because spaces are going to be coming off lease much sooner than we would have anticipated. So the commission recommendation was to go with option 1, to modify the ordinance and the rules to make this clear, and that's staff's recommendation.
All right, any questions of staff? I have a real fat, is this unique, this requirement?
No.
So this is pretty much standard throughout the industry?
And we've had this requirement in place over 10 years, 15 years, longer, and that's the first time it's been objected to.
Is this a new owner of a park? That's, okay. All right, we do have one speaker, Ms. Polly.
So, I know registrations are common in rent control jurisdictions of regulated spaces, but I don't think ones that aren't regulated by the ordinance, I don't think you have the legal authority to necessarily track. And I'm unaware of any city that's asked for that, although I'll get with Ms. Grayson because I know she probably works in other jurisdictions. I'd be interested in that. But I just really wish this wouldn't be a hill to die on. In 2025, the leases will be under the ordinance. And that would be the same advice I would give to the park owner, by the way, is that this is not a hill to die on. So this is, in 2025, you're going to have the legal authority to track that information. And so hopefully it says that a park owner can't collect rent if they're not in compliance with the rules of the registration. That seems a little unjust, so.
I think the intent is to get the park owner to comply. All right, any questions, comments, or motions?
I will, motion to approve staff recommendation.
Approve option number 1, amended ordinance rules to clarify that the annual registration form shall include specified information relating to month-to-month spaces, spaces subject to long-term leases, park-owned manager spaces, and vacant spaces. This amendment would be declarative of existing laws set in the ordinance and rules. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
We have a first and a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? No opposition. The motion passes. Moving on to item number 9, Mobile Home Rent Review Commission.
Yeah, I'll be quick on this one. You've all, well, most of you have been on council for some time, and sometimes it's not the easiest to get a person to serve on the Mobile Home Rent Review Commission. In 2021, we added a stipend to stimulate interest. And in 2020, we changed it from an at-large appointment to individual council member appointments. The commission has, they're all in favor of keeping the commission in place. We're just presenting the options because we feel like it's a policy decision by council. It depends on you if you want to keep the commission or not. We do have a commission of 5 right now. They have been through training. They have been through the biennial review. And so the recommendation is that you just review the options and provide direction as appropriate.
All right, any questions of staff?
Just a quick comment that, you know, for 10 years, we couldn't get anyone to serve on this. I mean, it was the worst thing. We'd get 1 or 2 people, couldn't get anyone. And then I finally brought up an idea that we eliminate it, and now there's lots of interest in it. So anyways, so it appears to be working as long as we threaten to get rid of it. So let's just keep it like that.
All righty, we do have 2 speakers. The first one is Shirley Dalton.
Gentlemen, I would recommend that we keep the commission in place as it currently is. I recognize that it is difficult to get people. Being the chairman of a volunteer organization, I know how hard it is to get volunteers to come forward and work with you. So I do recognize the difficulty. However, I am definitely opposed, and YMRA has been opposed, to hiring a hearing officer or putting it in the hands of the city council to take the place of the commission. I don't think you gentlemen really want to add something else to your task list. So I would recommend that we leave it as is.
Thank you. Ms. Pauly? Okay, she waives her right to do that. There are no further speakers. So, comments, questions, motions?
Move approval option number 4.
I'll second.
I have a first and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Moving on to item number 10. That would be simplify the MNOI process.
Of those of you who have sat through to listen to an MNOI rent adjustment hearing, you know it can be quite complex and complicated. The ordinance was and the rules were drafted quite a while ago to reflect requirements imposed on cities that have rent control in order to determine whether the park owner is getting a fair return or whether a special rent adjustment, as we call it, is warranted. We're somewhat constrained in modifying that. Each application can be very different because how the park owner wants to make his or her arguments is dependent on the park owner, not the city. And so the city crafted these rules and requirements and forms based on what we believe would be the most likely way park owners would apply. And then as each application comes in, the city's experts have to review it and decide if the application is complete, and we go from there. Our recommendation from a legal standpoint is there is really no way to streamline the process to make sure that the park owner bears the burden of demonstrating they're entitled to something more than the annual adjustment. As we've discussed today, imposing an MNOI rent adjustment on park residents can be quite significant monetarily. The costs of the gallon adjustment, which are the costs of the park owner's experts, unfortunately or fortunately, the way you look at it, those are mandated through court decisions, and the city does try to be as expeditious and efficient as possible in hopes that the park owner is doing that as well and instructing their lawyers. We do have a process to assist in the city evaluating the reasonableness of those costs, but we feel the ordinance needs to stay the way it is. We have a concern that trying to streamline it in some way, we really risk creating problems. So I can answer any questions.
All right, thank you. Any questions of staff? Okay, I believe we have a couple speakers here. Ms. Pauly? Okay. Mitch Emerson, he's not here. Suzanne Taylor?
Again, I'm Suzanne Taylor. Thank you for taking the time and actually talking about some of these subjects, by the way. I really appreciate it. And I want to invite you to our park anytime to come learn what we do. We're not going to be in the bottom 7 on the tour bus, but we have a lot more to do, and we really would like you to understand our position better than I can do in a 2-minute comment or a short letter that might get your attention or may not. So with that, I'll commence with my comments. I would like to simplify the MNOI process, and one way to do that is to put 2 parties together to negotiate it before you enter into the MNOI complex, convoluted process. It's extremely complicated. I had to learn it. It took me months. It's expensive, and I'm going to get into that right now. This is too expensive for all parties. Our staff report was, Jennifer's staff report was 1,600 pages. That's that tall. That's an exaggeration. That tall. It is expensive. We spent $124,000, and the city spent $131,000. That's $400,000. That does not include what the residents paid their attorneys and professional service providers. I don't know how much they spent. We could have worked together and spent that plus improving our park, improving just Valley View. It would have gone a long way. It would have repaved the streets, and yet here we are paying, as pointed out earlier, the attorneys. So I would like to propose looking at the ordinance and coming up with a way that we could talk with the residents about current expenses, current financial situations, rather than kind of just manipulating 20 years of data that you may or may not have and coming up with some kind of guess as to what is the right number. There is an actual number that's the right number, and I think we could get to that and save that $400,000. I also would like to say, it was commented on earlier that the Galan fee would cover our expenses. The city, I feel like I was treated unfairly, and our residents were treated unfairly also in some of these costs. I don't want them to have to pay the city's fees, and I don't want them to have to pay our fees, and we would save that as well. Our fees were $124, and the city unilaterally, with little explanation other than comparing it to another application, cut our return that we could, our reimbursement to, and left us $66,000 in legal bills. So we had to pay legal bills before we put any cash flow back into our reserves for capital improvements.
All right,
So I
thank
think
you.
there is room for improvement. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your comment. Okay, gentlemen, any questions, discussion?
Mr. Mayor, may I clarify?
Yes.
The current ordinance does have a method for the park owner to meet with the residents to try and come up with a voluntarily agreed upon special rent adjustment. That's already in the ordinance. And we have not been presented with any ideas for how to make that process better, but there is that process. And in fact, Jennifer can talk on that. I believe that was attempted in the situation that Suzanne Taylor did mention.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not too sure, but at the end of the day, for Suzanne's Park, we sat through 2 ballot opportunities because when the residents voted on the first time, we were like 1 vote shy of getting the vote to go through with the special rent adjustment application. The residents came back to me, they said, can we vote again? We cleared it with the attorney's office, we cleared it with the park owner, and we had a second vote. I sat in the recreation building and they took another vote. It did not pass, so it ultimately came to the commission. So I just wanted to, we do have that process to where they have to present why they're proposing the increase they are, and then they present the documentation supporting what their revenues and expenses are to the residents. So that meet and confer is a component in our documents now.
Okay, and that shouldn't even be a regulatory thing for park owners and residents to discuss things. I mean, that should be just,
Common sense.
yeah, it just should be everyday business, in my opinion. You shouldn't have to come to us and say, hey, we want to discuss with the residents on things. I think that's just, doing good business. That's just me, though. So anyway, thank you for that clarification, because I was going to ask that question. Comments, questions, or motions?
The only comment I have is that the reason I have taken the position that I did on the cap and the 100% was to avoid the MNOI process, because this MNOI process, nobody wins. The attorneys win. They get a lot of money. Not you. Anyways, the attorneys make a lot of money, and everyone seems to go away with a sour taste in their mouth. So anyway, this is what I want to get away from, and until we start looking at all other ways to avoid these MNOI processes, with the way the inflation rates are right now at 10%, this is going to keep coming, and it's going to keep coming. There's going to be a number of these coming in the next, I'm assuming, in the next few years. So we need to figure out what we can do to avoid this.
Okay, right now, the staff has
With that, I'll make my motion will be no changes.
no changes. Okay, approve staff recommendations to make no changes to the ordinance or rules pertaining to the procedures or requirements for special rent adjustments. Do I hear a second?
So moved.
We have first and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Number 11, waiver of filing fee.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. This item is the waiver of the filing fee for the decrease in rents based on a discontinuance or a reduction of service or amenity. Since 1991, Council has established an application and appeal fee to offset the costs associated with processing any type of application that comes in. Actual costs associated with processing an application range between $5,250, and that was to process an agreed-upon meet and confer application, up to $190,000, which was based on a special rent adjustment MNOI application. We kind of cite in the staff report and up on the screen the concerns if this application fee is waived. Since the city's been incorporated, we have not had a decrease in rents application or a discontinuing of service application, but the concern is that you take that fee away and anyone can file, resident, park owner, and it's just gonna come on staff, and then we have to go to the commission and or council if it's appealed. The current documents have it going to the commission, and you can see on the board that the $1,750 doesn't even come close to processing or paying for the actual cost of the low end of the current application of $5,250. It's postage, it's staff time, it's process that's involved, and we feel like maintaining the $1,750 $50 fee, which has been in place for at least 10-plus years, is adequate. That's all I have at this time. Oh, just to let you know that the commission is upholding the staff recommendation, which is to retain the existing language of the ordinance and rules.
All right, any questions of staff? We have one speaker, Ms. Dalton.
Gentlemen, it was originally suggested that the fee be waived or postponed until settlement of the issue because the cost of, the fee is not the largest cost involved in submitting one of these applications. I went through the rules and regulations of the paperwork, et cetera, documentation that has to be presented to the commission to ask for a discount and rent on determination or lack of amenities, and it would take a lawyer to do it. We're not lawyers, residents are not lawyers. We don't have the money to hire the lawyers that would be needed and the financial experts that would be needed to go through and file all the paperwork, which is one reason you haven't had anybody applying for a rent reduction based on loss of amenities. It's not just the $1,750 fee. It's all the rest of it that's involved. If there would be some way that we had to enforce the parks to maintain their property and not reduce their amenities that are part of what we pay rent for, we wouldn't even need this provision. But we don't have a way to do it. This is the only thing we have. And if we could have that $1,750 at least deferred until settlement of the issue and then the losing party pay the fee. That's all we wish.
Thank you. All right, there are no other speakers, comments, questions, or motions.
Consider paying a rent each month that includes the use of a community pool, but then you can't use it for the entire year of 2020, 2021. These are amenities you're paying for. The service of this pool, this is just the example that comes to my mind as something that I'm paying for rent for something I can't use. If it was my pool, I'd be able to use it, but I can't use it because it's a community one. I'm sure there's other examples. It would be extraordinarily frustrating to face that and then have to come up with $1,750 to articulate why I'm paying for a service I'm not able to use. I think Ms. Dalton makes a valid point for a deferment until such time as the application can be resolved. But what do you guys think? I don't know. That's something that's would frustrate me.
Well, as Ms. Crawford said, if we were to defer this and change the rules on this, we will see dozens and dozens and dozens of these things.
No, you won't, because we can't afford the lawyers and the legal and the financial experts. This is the minor part.
Perhaps
Can I add a note that I stated in the commission record? Over when the pandemic hit and the regulations restricted outdoor spaces, use, everything, a lot of things were closed down. And the public, health director restricted things in our county and the state level. When those guidelines and restrictions started to ease, and we did have residents in different parks calling our office, advising us that, hey, the restrictions are easing. How come I can't get into the pool? City staff called the park manager and the park owner, and the pools were reopened. We never heard back from the residents of those parks saying that it wasn't. And if we did, we would continue to do follow-up, and we'd probably send out code enforcement, or even my staff would go out. So I feel like there's a provision in there for those smaller things of pool use just straight communication with the city staff then to the park owner, we can help make that happen without any application and God forbid any lawyer. Um, and so if it's a big issue, like they bury the pool, they completely take it away, the city's gonna probably step in on that anyway. Or the roof a tree falls on the roof of a clubhouse and it never gets fixed. Those are the things where this application comes in on. Not that they close my laundry room down for 2 weeks and I can't use it. And I don't even think Shirley's recommending that. But we haven't had these applications. I don't think it's just because of the application fee, because no matter what, even if you waive that application fee, they still have to come up with the money to pay for the attorney. And then what's the mechanism that the city is gonna go back and collect the costs associated with the application? And if that's the case, are we talking the true cost of the city to do this process plus recapturing that fee, or maintaining the $17.50 to encourage people to think about it and maybe check in with the city first before they decide to hire an attorney and submit this type of application?
Okay. Councilman Thorpe, do you have any comments, questions?
Not at this time.
Okay, do I hear a motion?
I'll make a motion that no changes.
Okay, we have a motion to approve staff recommendation to make no changes to the rules and ordinances. Do I hear a second?
I'll second his motion.
All right, we have a first and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to item number 12, selection of resident representatives.
Thank you. This item was brought up by a stakeholder. Currently, the ordinance requires that on an annual basis, the resident representative in the park is selected on a ballot, and they have an annual election requirement, which tends to be consuming for the person who volunteered to begin with. And currently, of the 41 parks that we have here in Yucaipa, only 7 of them have a resident representative. And the role of the resident representative is to be kind of the go-to for the park owner and or city staff if there's an issue going on in the park and we're trying to just kind of vet, get information, and get in touch with a particular person in the park or the overall opinion of the park. The suggestion is that once a person is elected into office, that they can remain in office and that the term of that office for a year is just eliminated. And the suggestion is that unless they're challenged, they can stay in play, but if they are challenged, then a new election can take place. The commission approved amending the ordinance and the rules to eliminate the resident representative term. Once elected, they can stay in place. Staff's recommendation is that you review options 1, 2, 3 and provide direction.
Okay, any questions of staff? Hearing none, we do have some speakers. Shirley Dalton.
I think I'll let Joe speak first. If that's okay.
Sure. Joe, come on up.
Hi, I'm Joe Sutter. I live in Wildwood Canyon Mobile Home Park, and I just want you to go with the staff recommendation and eliminate the term. It's very difficult to walk from coach to coach, and many of us are really physically challenged to do that. And I figure my main role is to notify residents of what's going on. If I get something from the city, I can hand letter a sign and put it up, and it's done. But going coach to get those ballots is really hard, especially if you have to do it every year. Thank you.
All righty, thank you. Ms. Dalton?
I wanted Joe to speak first because it was her proposal initially. I have to agree with her. She and I both have the problems of, we are mobility challenged, as you might guess, and to go door to door to get this every year, it's hard enough to get someone to volunteer to even do this job. when you add on these additional requirements. That's why we only have 7 out of 41. So I would like to see the change that was recommended put in place. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Dalton, do you, with respect to YMRA, park participation, do you get representatives? Is that turned out to be a pretty good turnout?
We do, but not like we'd like to. It's always hard with, I'm sure you're aware, with any volunteer agency to get people to volunteer to come forward and take part in what needs to be done. So we really would like to have every park have a city representative. We would like to have every park have a YMRA representative. We don't yet, but we're working on it.
Okay, thank you. All right, Irene Vasquez.
I appreciate the work that you do to help us. I'm a resident of Grandview West Mobile Home Park. And my understanding is that there are 41 mobile home parks in Yucaipa with 7 representatives, 7 reps. Council members represent, I believe, Mr. Bieber, you have 1 park, and Bobby Duncan has 25. So my question is, because we are looking for an easier way to get a representative, a liaison between the park and the city, that it would be advantageous, as Shirley and Joe stated, that it be much easier. I would like to represent. There's no need to go around to the park. What I'm doing is I'm a liaison. I will give the information to the park residents as it comes to me. It doesn't seem to me that you really need to have votes for any of this. We are doing a job to help you to be representatives. Also, I have a question about your job and Bobby Duncan's job especially. How closely do you work with your residents to give them information or to reach out to them? Because it is important that everyone in a mobile home park have their rights and rules in place so that they can be protected by unscrupulous managers and owners. A lot of elderly people need to be aware of these, and I believe they are not being given that opportunity because you're not reaching out. Perhaps you do. I don't know about Bobby Duncan with 25 mobile home parks. Thank you.
Thank you. And I think that's what the role of the representative is to stay in contact with the city, to be updated on any changes, proposals, or amendments that may come across. Plus, we need active participation in the YMRA. So they provide information also to the park residents. So this position is actually pretty critical. And as to whether you want to volunteer and vote, it's great that you want to step up and volunteer. But I think just to keep it clean, you may want to vote. You may only get 5 votes, but if no one else objects, you're it. So, oh, well, I'm sorry.
Vasquez, I don't want to speak for the other gentleman on the dais, but I'm not a fan of our city being a districted city. Even if I only represent one mobile home park that's in District 4, anybody wants to, I will be a liaison to anybody who wants to hear it. If you're a resident of the city of Yucaipa, then I represent you, whether you live in District 4 or not. And I'd be willing to bet that the gentleman sitting to my right share the similar sentiments. We wanted to serve the city of Yucaipa. I don't want to serve just District 4. The city's health as a whole is what's important, not just one district.
You're absolutely right. We're blessed with city council members that are interested in all of the city, not just ourselves. All right, any questions, comments, or motions?
Is the approved option number 2? Then I will move option number 2.
Second.
All right. Excuse me. Okay, we have a motion to approve option number 2. If no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passes. Item number 14, property tax pass-through upon sale of park. Thank you.
Sorry, I'll do this one real quick so that we can get to number 14. This item is the public notice of the upcoming biennial review. Currently, the ordinance and the rules, it doesn't give any direction in terms of how to notice the meeting. And so the recommendation that the commission supports, and so does staff, is that we will amend the ordinance to include that I will notice the biennial review and the deadline to submit information in the paper. And I will also, if a resident representative isn't appointed, we will post the notice in the park pursuant to 1520-060, which is clubhouse, mailbox, et cetera. That's all I have.
All right, thank you. Any questions for staff? Okay, see if we have any comments. This is item number 13. I'm so sorry, can't keep track. Looks like we have no comments.
Irene, I think you.
Oh, I'm sorry. Irene Vasquez, yes. Okay. Gentlemen, any questions, comments, or motions?
I will move, is it an amendment that we're trying to do here?
Yes.
Was it YMC 15.20.140?
Yes.
That's my motion.
Okay, we have a motion.
I'll second.
I'm trying to figure out if there's an easier way to
Yeah.
describe this.
I think that's it.
That's it?
Is that it? Okay.
That'll do it. Okay, we have a motion and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Item number 14.
There's only two more. Okay. Item 14 is a request from park owners that the ordinance be amended to allow a property tax pass-through upon sale of the park. Presently, in the MNOI rent adjustment process, we compare base year NOI, net operating income, as adjusted by 80% of CPI, essentially, with current year net operating income. And in calculating net operating income, we take into account certain expenses, which include increases in property tax. So that formula will look at what was your property tax in the base year, what is it now, and in determining if the park owner's entitled to a special rent adjustment, that increase in property tax is taken into account. Our understanding is that the park owners would like to amend the ordinance so that they can have essentially a pass-through of an increase in property tax when they sell the park. You know, when property is sold in California, it gets reassessed at its current value. The ordinance does not allow market value to be incorporated into determining if a rent increase is warranted. So staff does not support this because it essentially codifies market value, because the whole idea is the assessed value of the property goes up, and that's why your property tax goes up, even if it's limited in some percentage. So the commission agreed with staff and recommends that you not make any changes.
All right, thank you. Any questions of staff? All right, we do have two speakers. First one is Julie Polly, and she waves that, and Robert Evans.
So this is, again, is another way we're trying to avoid the MNOI process and just go straight through it, have it be a pass-through. The couple suggestions in the past reviews was pass the new property tax on through, and then that park owner would not be able to apply for another MNOI for 3 years. Another option was proposed was to do the property taxes pass through and have the rent increase be spread out over 2 years. So that's a couple of suggestions that were made over the last reviews periods. And again, that'd be another way to avoid MNOIs.
Thank you. There are no further comments from the public. Gentlemen, do we have any questions, comments, or a motion?
Is there, I mean, I'm trying to work my way through if somebody wanted to take advantage of this, could somebody these park owners sell it to like their brother. Now they stays in the property's in the family, but they're now able to raise because, I mean, it's a,
There are many different ways parks are sold. I know from reading that a lot of parks are sold now to hedge funds and corporations and entities, not family-run. I would not want to opine on, what the trend is of, if people are doing this to artificially increase property tax. But the bottom line is, the city has tried to eliminate the factor of market rent, because once you start factoring in the market, you essentially eliminate the whole point of rent control. It's needed when the market is out of whack, because you have a captive group of people who can't easily move. And our feeling is, if you allow, anytime the park sells, they get a pass-through of property tax, you've essentially opened the door to the market. And as far as some of the suggestions, like limiting when you can get an M&OI rent increase, that actually raises a whole bunch of legal issues we would have to analyze. And some park owners might like that they would say, yeah, I won't go for an M&OI for 3 years. Another park owner might say, nope, I want to come in next year even with my property tax increase. So it's not as simple as just, if we do this, we can do that.
thank you.
Anybody else? All right, do I hear a motion?
I move that per staff recommendations, no changes to the ordinance or rules relating to the treatment of property taxes as operating expenses under YMC 15.20.100A or B.
All right, we have a first. Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Don't hear it. Motion carries. Okay, moving on to item number 15, develop a separate rental adjustment policy for 501c3s.
This one, you heard mentioned a little bit earlier. We do have one nonprofit park in the city. We have 4, sorry.
Wrong city.
And we did have one come in that got an increase, but the analysis that was undertaken before the commission resulted in disallowing certain expenses due to lack of documentation. Nonprofit parks are not supposed to make a profit, but they have expenses, and they have depending on how they're set up, they have various funds and categories. And so in our view, we don't need a special process to evaluate that. What is still needed is documentation of claimed expenses and a way to make sure that residents are not going to be subjected to something exorbitant because of the manner in which the internal mechanism of the park is set up. So we do not feel that there needs to be a change in the existing ordinance, and that was the recommendation to the commission, and they did agree with that.
All right, thank you. Any questions of staff? Okay, see if we have any speakers on this. I neglected to look. We have Suzanne Taylor.
Pardon me, but that summary just took my breath away. We had 1,600 pages of documentation. We could fully document every single nonprofit expense. We send quarterly financials to the city for the last 20 years. There is no lack of documentation regarding our expenses. It is, in fact, in our documents that the nonprofit gets an administrative fee for their services, and that's all they get. All the cash flow is returned to the park. That's how we differ from a for-profit. We collect rents, We pay our expenses, we try to put money in reserves, we pay the nonprofit fee, everything goes back for program services and capital improvements. So I'm not sure how I can interpret that any different, because everything that I brought to your attention today, seems like tonight, I can't rebut because of the format of this hearing. So I disagree with a lot of things that were said today. They're not true, and that by far really caps it up. It's really hard to regroup here. I think there should be a separate process for nonprofits because we do not strive to get a return on investment in the same way a for-profit does, and we do have different expenses. And the city knew about those expenses when we went into this project 20 years ago. We've been here a long time. So one of the reasons they said that there shouldn't be another process for nonprofit is the argument that we should have known better 20 years ago. If that argument held any logic whatsoever, we wouldn't be having this hearing today because you should have known better on how to write the ordinance. No, what's true is situations evolve and you have to look at them under the new circumstances and the current circumstances. Our whole mission is to provide affordable housing for people who need it and to make it a great place to live. And we work on that every single day. We have never, maybe 2 years, ever received reimbursement for a staff expense related to the nonprofit in this park. As a matter of fact, we recently refinanced our projects, and the other communities that we were involved in that refunding asked to not have the Yucaipa Park included because they were paying these expenses. So that's just clearly not true. And maybe there's an explanation for why that point of view was said, but it's certainly not mine. If you go back and you look at the video, and if you look at the 1,600 pages of the record, you will find that we answered every question. We met dozens of times with the residents during this process. We met with them one-on-one, and I don't think you would I think Jennifer and I worked really well in the way we spoke with our residents. She and I did everything we could to get those residents involved in this decision. And the MNOI process we have to calculate the MNOI before we go meet with the residents. We have to spend all that money before we meet with the residents. We cannot just go and negotiate with them based on current numbers. We have to give them the MNOI calculation. So that money has to be spent in advance. Same with the capital improvements. You have to do the capital improvement before you go before and meet with the residents and say, hey, by the way, do you happen to agree that this is a public health and safety issue? So a lot of things are just they need more discussion, actually.
Thank you. Real
Sorry
fast.
about my temper,
No,
but
no,
that
that's-
really got my goat.
I understand. How long have you been working with staff on securing a change in this ordinance?
My records show that we've talked about it maybe 3 times, and I think it was 2012. I'm sorry, I don't have that with me. That would be off the top of my head. I was prepared to answer that during the MNOI hearing, which was 2 years ago now. But I think it was 2012 when we were told no. And we were told no when I wrote a letter, maybe in 16 or something like that. We were told no when I made that suggestion here. It's really, when you hear from city staff, no, we don't want to talk about it, and you go to the commission or you go to the council and you get no support, they're under no obligation to talk to us because they don't think it's important enough. They may think it's important, but it doesn't become their priority.
What
So
I'd
I'm
like
not
to
blaming them
suggest is
whatsoever.
that you meet with them and work this out. You're very passionate about this.
I am, and we're
appreciate
not
it.
going for another rent
And
increase. This
please,
is-
I'd like to get through this.
I'm sorry.
That's okay.
Pardon me.
Everyone needs to sit down and have a serious discussion on how to resolve this. And it's just not during comment time. You need to get ahead of this game and start discussions tomorrow and work towards some sort of change that maybe you'd like to see 2 years from now, if that's the direction that happens.
This is something that they've been discussing quite some time, and
But it's not continuous, it sounds like. It sounds like it's just kind of sporadic. Yes.
Can I just clarify? I think perhaps my comment was unintentionally negative. The request for, Ms. Taylor referenced the administrative fee. All sorts of expenses, as with any park, were included in their application for an MNOI rent adjustment. Those were analyzed by Dr. Barr and the city's other experts, and analyzed by the separate legal counsel who analyzes for the city staff. Those came to the commission as part of a recommendation what to allow, what to disallow. The commission made the decision that certain types of expenses that are unique to nonprofit, in this case, the administrative fee was one of them, and it wasn't just one fee. There were elements, they requested an administrative fee over a period of several years, which is not the way our ordinance works. But the commission made the decision in granting the $60.21 rent increase. The commission made the decision that certain claimed expenses were not documented. This was not my finding or staff's finding. This was the commission finding. And yes, she and her people presented their arguments. They could have appealed to the city council. They did not. So we have a binding decision from 2 years ago where the commission found, yes, you are entitled to a special rent adjustment, but not in the amount you requested. And one of the things that was an issue for the commission was the lack of clarity on how that administrative fee was set. Because while they may not earn a profit, people who work for the park are still taking money out of the park. And so the commission, through staff, before it even went to the commission and then at the commission, there were questions asked about why is this fee what it is? Why are you claiming over the number of years you're claiming? And it was the commission decision. It was not sufficiently documented to allow it as a cost as defined under the ordinance. They have raised this issue in the past. It has been presented to the commission as part of the biennial review. Staff has been consistent in recommending that you not create a separate process, and that has been the consensus of the council over the years, that we think the ordinance is flexible enough to allow their issues to be addressed, but it doesn't take away from the need for them to document and justify why certain expenses need to be included and that then have to be factored into what the residents may have to pay.
I
Okay,
disagree with
and
that.
This is not,
but I
yeah, we're
don't
not,
want to.
this is not debate class now. So
agree.
you said that.
Thank you.
You said that, so thank you very much.
I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
And if you wouldn't mind directing, I would be happy to meet with them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Well, I think that back and forth actually does kind of justify there might be an issue with the difference between a nonprofit and the regular park owners.
There is a disconnect of some sort.
I don't want to create an entire subsection to the rental increase policy. I don't want to go down that road, but maybe there are some slight adjustments we can make for the nonprofits. I don't know, and I'm not an expert at this, so maybe it'd be something we could look at.
Is that something that would come back if we were to move down that road? Something that would come back to us with recommendations outside of no changes that might be more appropriate for nonprofit?
Well, what if we went ahead and moved forward with the no changes right now, but we also need to address what she
Ms.
had
Taylor
mentioned.
says.
Yes. Is that possible?
Based on your direction, absolutely, but I will say when they brought the application, I mean, there were even the city's team was questioning the charges associated or the expenses that they were claiming that they were trying to recoup in the application. And it's on page number 4, Valley View Suzanne's Park that she represents, the increase that they received was $60.21. That raised the residents' base rent by that amount. I think she was trying to get 102 or 120 off the top of my head. And through our experts, they didn't feel like whether they are a nonprofit park or not, it was justified. But if you want us to go back and look at ways to help the nonprofits when they go through a special rent adjustment, to give them more lenience, to give them a larger adjustment, we can definitely do that if that's what your direction is.
Well, I think maybe I'm going to look into it a little deeper. Maybe I'll go right now with the no changes, but I am definitely going to research a little more into this, for sure. It doesn't have to be an action at this point.
Sure.
To revisit, but I'm definitely going to look at it.
So you're making a motion to?
Right now, my motion would be no changes, but I'm definitely going to inquire more.
We're listening to you.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a first and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries. All right, one more thing. Motion to and vote to direct staff to prepare the appropriate documents and return to the city council for approval. Do I hear a motion for that?
So moved.
Second.
First and a second. If no further discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Thank you very much. This is very difficult for us, as you can tell. There's a lot of things that, a lot of good comments on both sides of the issue. Thank you for your patience, and right now, we'll go ahead and adjourn this meeting.